Hey guys, welcome back to Shockingly True World War II. Today we're diving into one of the most insane stories from the war, and trust me, this one sounds like it came straight out of a comic book. I'm talking about the Nazis trying to control the actual weather. Yeah, you heard that right. Not just predicting storms or tracking clouds, but literally trying to manipulate fog, create artificial weather, and turn Mother Nature into a weapon. And here's the thing, this isn't some wild conspiracy theory. This actually happened. The Nazis were seriously obsessed with weather control during World War II, and some of their attempts were straight up bizarre. So buckle up, because we're about to explore one of the strangest chapters of the war. Before we get into the crazy stuff, let's talk about why weather even mattered so much in World War II. See, back in the 1940s, armies didn't have satellites or modern radar systems. Weather could literally make or break entire military campaigns. Think about it. If you're launching a massive invasion like D-Day, you need to know if a storm's coming. If you're flying bombers over enemy territory, clouds and fog could hide your targets, or hide enemy fighters waiting to shoot you down. And if you're commanding submarines in the Atlantic Ocean, knowing where storms are can help you avoid detection or plan your attacks. The problem for Nazi Germany was that weather in the Atlantic Ocean moves from west to east. That meant the Allies, who controlled bases in North America, Greenland, and Iceland, could see weather systems coming way before the Germans could. It was like the Allies had a crystal ball, and the Nazis were stuck guessing. This gave the Allies a massive advantage, especially for planning naval operations and air raids. So the Germans got desperate. They needed better weather intelligence, and they were willing to do almost anything to get it. This is where things start getting wild. The Nazis set up secret weather stations in some of the most remote places on Earth. We're talking about the Arctic, hidden islands, and even North America. In 1943, a German U-boat actually sailed all the way to the coast of Labrador in Canada and secretly installed an automated weather station. They called it Kurt, and it transmitted weather data back to the German Navy for a while before it eventually failed. The Nazis even sent special weather reconnaissance aircraft on dangerous missions over the Arctic just to gather meteorological data. It became this secret weather war that most people didn't even know was happening. But here's where it gets really weird. Adolf Hitler himself had some, let's just say, unique ideas about weather prediction. In 1941, Hitler decided that weather forecasting wasn't really about science at all. He thought it was more about intuition and natural instincts. So he came up with this plan to recruit what he called men gifted with a sixth sense who live in nature to predict the weather. His idea was to put these guys in rural huts with telephones, and they'd call in forecasts based on watching birds, insects, and other animals. Like some kind of mystical weather shamans. I'm not making this up, this was an actual proposal from the leader of Nazi Germany. Fortunately, this bonkers plan never actually happened, and the German military stuck with trained meteorologists. But still, imagine explaining to your boss that your new job is watching squirrels to predict tomorrow's weather. Now, while the Nazis couldn't actually control the weather on a large scale, they did figure out ways to manipulate the atmosphere for tactical purposes. And this is where it gets genuinely fascinating. The Germans became masters of creating artificial fog and smoke screens to hide important targets from Allied bombers. The best example of this was the battleship Tirpitz, which was one of the most powerful warships in the German Navy. The Allies desperately wanted to sink it, so they kept sending bombing raids to attack it while it was hiding in a Norwegian fjord. But the Germans had a defense plan. They would pump chlorosulfuric acid into the air, which rapidly absorbed moisture and created these massive, dense fog banks that completely hid the ship. Allied pilots would fly over and literally couldn't see their target through the artificial fog. Here's the crazy part. This acid fog was so intense and toxic that it actually damaged the environment for years afterward. Scientists discovered decades later that pine trees near the fjord showed stunted growth or missing growth rings from the mid-1940s because the acid fog was basically killing them. Some trees didn't grow at all in 1945 because of the damage. So the Nazis were creating this artificial weather, but at a serious environmental cost. The German military also used regular smoke generators on battlefields and around factories to simulate clouds or mist and confuse enemy bombers. Would you have trusted flying through that toxic fog if you were an Allied pilot? Let us know in the comments below. There were even reports that some German researchers experimented with ideas like cloud seeding or messing with the ionosphere, the upper part of Earth's atmosphere, hoping they could disrupt enemy radio communications or create heavy fog over enemy positions. But here's the truth. None of these ideas ever worked on a large scale. They never got past the experimental stage. Despite all their efforts and all their wild theories, the Nazis never built an actual weather control machine. Weather remained something you dealt with, not something you could truly control. Both the Axis and Allied forces were still at the mercy of Mother Nature. The timing of D-Day, for example, was only possible because Allied meteorologists made a brilliant forecast about a brief weather window, not because anyone controlled the weather. So why do myths about Nazi weather weapons persist? Well, partly because the Nazis themselves loved propaganda about having wonder weapons and nature being on their side. And partly because some of their experiments were so bizarre that people assumed there must have been more to the story. But the reality is that Nazi weather control efforts were limited to gathering better forecasts and using conventional smoke and fog for camouflage. No storm machines, no climate weapons, just a lot of desperate attempts to gain any possible advantage in a war they were losing. Now, if you think trying to control the weather sounds crazy, buckle up because the Nazis had a whole list of insane experimental weapons and projects that somehow get even stranger. Let's talk about the sun gun. Yes, you heard that right, the sun gun. In 1945, after the war ended, Allied forces interrogated German scientists and discovered they had been working on plans for a space-based superweapon. The idea was to put a giant concave mirror, potentially miles across, into orbit around Earth. This mirror would focus sunlight into a concentrated beam that could supposedly boil oceans or incinerate entire cities from space. It was basically a death ray powered by the sun. The German scientists themselves admitted this would only be possible in maybe 50 to 100 years, so it never got close to being built. But the fact that they spent time seriously planning this thing is absolutely wild. After the war, Time and Life magazines ran stories about it because it sounded so much like science fiction. And yet, Nazi engineers really did draw up plans for an orbital solar mirror weapon. Okay, here's another one, the wind cannon. Facing Allied air superiority, Nazi engineers tried to invent a weapon that could literally blow planes out of the sky using air pressure. They built this device called the wind cannon that used an explosive mixture of oxygen and hydrogen to fire a massive blast of compressed air through a barrel. The shockwave was supposed to knock low-flying aircraft out of control. In tests, it could shatter wooden boards at a few hundred meters, but when they tried it against actual planes, it basically failed. They also experimented with a vortex cannon that was supposed to create a tornado-like whirlwind strong enough to rip the wings off enemy aircraft. Spoiler alert, that didn't work either. These weapons were abandoned as the war ended because they proved too weak and unreliable in real combat. But wait, there's more. Nazi engineers also developed a sonic cannon, a weapon designed to kill people with sound. Led by a scientist named Dr. Richard Wallachek, this device used explosions in a combustion chamber to create focused, low-frequency sound waves. At medium range, it caused nausea and dizziness by vibrating the inner ear. At closer range, under 200 meters, it could supposedly cause internal bleeding or collapse lung tissue through resonance. It was trying to shake a person apart from the inside using sound. Thankfully, this horrifying weapon never saw real combat. The equipment was huge, stationary, and incredibly vulnerable. Even a single rifle shot could damage the reflectors and disable the whole thing. Do you think any of these weapons could have actually changed the war if they'd worked? Drop your thoughts in the comments. All of these projects, the weather experiments, the space mirrors, the sonic weapons, they all show just how desperate and grandiose Nazi Germany became during the war. They were willing to explore literally any avenue, no matter how absurd or impractical, searching for some kind of miracle weapon or advantage. Most of these wild experiments failed or never made it past the drawing board. But they're all thoroughly documented in historical records, and they serve as these bizarre, darkly fascinating footnotes to World War II. The truth is that a regime responsible for immense, real atrocities also spent valuable resources chasing fantastical schemes that sound like they came from a pulp science fiction novel. It's a reminder that desperation can lead people down strange paths, and that even in the midst of one of history's darkest chapters, there were these moments that seem almost too weird to believe. But they really happened. Nazi Germany really did try to manipulate the weather, really did plan space-based death rays, and really did build cannons that shot air and sound at enemy planes. So there you have it, the bizarre, shocking, and absolutely true story of Nazi weather control attempts and other insane World War II experiments. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's strangest stories, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to Shockingly True World War II for more incredible tales from the war. And seriously, let us know in the comments, if you could control the weather, would you want it to snow all the time or be sunny forever? We'll be back soon with more jaw-dropping stories that prove history is way wilder than any movie could ever be. History is wild, and this is just the beginning.